Hello, welcome back to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. Today we have a very special guest who's going to be talking to us about one of the most relevant topics in today's modern age, and that is the blockchain and cryptocurrency. Allie Grace Garnett is an expert in the field and has many years of consulting with as a content strategist for publications that focus on distributed finance, decentralized finance, and other areas where she's been asked to weigh in on some very specific things related to cryptocurrency. Allie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to talk with you today. You know, there's a wide spectrum out there of people's understanding of what cryptocurrency is, where did it come from, and where is it headed?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think it's going these days?
I would love to clear that up. I think that everybody is focused on cryptocurrency when actually blockchain technology is what's driving cryptocurrency and has many applications. And the interesting thing about blockchain technology is it's actually not new. Bitcoin was the first major application of blockchain technology where it's become essentially a household name. But actually blockchain technology, I don't want to get the decade wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's been around since like the 90s. So it's actually not a new technology. It's just been more recently applied in ways that is exposing how useful the technology can be.
And the technology itself is really powerful because it creates this audit trail that verifies the data that's withheld within the blockchain, correct?
Yes. So the interesting thing about blockchain technology is that it can, in a decentralized way, securely allow trustless parties to interact. So let me break that down. Normally, in modern society, we rely upon and actually are forced to rely upon centralized authorities like governments and institutions to allow us to conduct banking, to have different lending and credit agreements. There's, anything financial, any kind of property exchange, it all goes through some kind of centralized authority because that's the only way to create security. But blockchain technology actually turns that on its head and distributes, it uses mechanisms to create consensus in a distributed way, but only through technology. And so it can be trustless parties that, meaning parties that don't have no reason to trust each other, but with no central intermediary, they can still transact securely using only technology. And that cuts out the middleman, and it can create a lot more efficiency. And it just creates a lot of disruptive potential actually in the marketplace.
And so an example of an institution that might do that, would that be something like MasterCard, like any kind of credit card company where you're able to make transactions and they're verifying that funds exist and credit's available, things like that?
Sure, that's one of the intermediaries. Your bank could be considered another intermediary, but yes, it's any centralized institution where you are external to the institution. You don't have access to the inner workings of MasterCard, or you don't have access to the inner workings of the government, the IRS, or any centralized authority. So, but with blockchain technology, with cryptocurrencies, these projects are generally open source where anyone can view the project's code and contribute actually.
That's really cool technology because it seems like by eliminating this centralized player, we end up with a much more efficient way of conducting business. I mean, it seems like there's a tremendous amount of overhead that goes into these centralized parties.
Yes, it's more efficient because you don't have a rent-seeking third party that wants to make money by being the middleman. And it also can be more secure because there's obviously opportunities for corruption. There's that it's more transparent at the same time because you can understand an entire process start to finish, which if you're going through a centralized authority, you may or may not have that visibility.
And is the security itself, it's powered by the cryptography, right? It's the technology of cryptography. It's very difficult to break, right?
Yes, it's very difficult to break cryptographic hashes, which are quite complicated to explain. And it also creates security by the distributed nature of the technology. So if you have a large blockchain network like Bitcoin and you have computers around the world who have the entire Bitcoin blockchain essentially downloaded and stored on their computer, it makes it very difficult for any one person or group of people, not impossible, but difficult to tamper with that blockchain, because you have people around the world who are participating in the network who all have a copy of the same information, the same blockchain, the same. And so to tamper with it makes it much more difficult by the distributed nature of the information.
Let's talk a little bit about how you got into this space. So originally, you clearly are you have a very engineering type brain. You're very technical. How did you get into this space where you were specializing in blockchain?
Well, I'll start off with a fun story. It was 2013. I was in New York. I lived on the west side of Midtown in a big apartment building. It was 40 stories in the building, so very large building with a lot of people living there. And there was a restaurant in the lobby that my my partner at the time and I always went to. And we went down there one day and there was a sign on the door that said Bitcoin accepted. And we said, we were friends with the owner, and we said, "What's Bitcoin?" And I don't remember what the owner said, but he said, "The owner lives in the building." And we said, "Oh, okay, I'll have the French fries." And so we went on with our meal and more or less forgot about it at the time. And so I've since researched it. And so Bitcoin became familiar to me, or when I started to hear about it more later, it was already familiar because of this fun story. And so I won't leave you hanging, wondering if Satoshi Nakamoto lived in the building. I've since researched it, and the restaurant only accepted Bitcoin for about a week, which they're probably kicking themselves right now. And I'm pretty sure that one of the early developers of Bitcoin lived in the building, which is why I saw that sign on the door. So it was just definitely an interesting, a funny little thing that happened at the time. And I was already working in finance, in traditional finance. I had co-founded a project finance firm. I had been raising capital for renewable energy funds, have a degree from Harvard Business School. And so working in professional and traditional finance has been a very nice launch pad for launching into focusing more on cryptocurrency. And there's just so much growth in cryptocurrency that it's just really an exciting space to be in. And then I also am focused on cryptocurrency because I really do consider myself to be a contrarian at heart. I live on a little farm off the grid in the jungle of Belize, which is really not a traditional choice for a Harvard Business School graduate. But I'm just very, very interested in decentralization and the disruptive potential of blockchain technology in the form of cryptocurrency and other applications. But I'm very interested in seeing how a decentralization can disrupt our modern systems and possibly actually bring like a democratization of finance to more people. So, I live in a small village that's, not wealthy by any stretch. And so I really can see firsthand what kind of potential, if implemented correctly, being able to bring Bitcoin, Ethereum, other cryptocurrencies to a large amount of people who are currently unbanked or underbanked, and giving them access. I think that there's there could be a lot of really positive social benefits from cryptocurrency if it's handled properly.
So now you're living in Central America. Aren't there some other Central America and other countries around the world who have started to make cryptocurrency official tender?
Yes, our neighbor El Salvador has declared Bitcoin to be legal tender. And actually, there's been 2 projects, they call it Bitcoin Beach. There's been 2 beach villages in El Salvador who have been doing it for longer than when it made the news last year. That's a very interesting development too, because by Bitcoin being accepted as legal tender in one country, it elevates its status because other countries are obligated on some level to recognize Bitcoin as legal tender, maybe not in their own countries, but because a country in the world recognizes it as legal tender, there's certain requirements where other countries have to follow suit to kind of honor that country's recognition that is in place.
And speaking of that, so, a lot of us have grown up where we may have been traveling internationally. And it seems like, at least in my experiences, many times merchants would want to accept a US dollar, even if we're in some other country. And so now that is obviously what they call a fiat currency because it's backed by a government. But now that you've got other countries in the world that are actually accepting cryptocurrency and using blockchain technology for very important things, now all of a sudden you've got corrupt governments and things like that that have less power because they don't, they might be avoiding manipulating a currency in order to, elicit control over their population, right?
I think it's really important, especially at this phase of cryptocurrency's evolution. I think it's really important to distinguish between use of cryptocurrency as a store of value and use of cryptocurrency as money for daily transactions. And it doesn't mean that any kind of form of crypto will never be commonly used to go to the corner store and buy some groceries, but that's not really how it's being used commonly, at least currently. And I'm not really sure that in the near future that we'll see that happen. I can't speak to longer term, but nobody wants to go to the store and buy a gallon of milk with 0.0001257 Bitcoins. It's not really it's not convenient. And so there's certainly a more evolution that needs to occur, maybe not of blockchain technology itself, but of the way it's being implemented and different technology solutions that work with different blockchains. And there's different ways that the technology can evolve to potentially be used more like money. But at least currently, a lot of the value, it comes from being derived as essentially a store of value more than, for day-to-day transactions.
Well, I have heard being able to move large sums of money. So if I wanted to pay you, being down in Belize, it would be very convenient for me to just send you a cryptocurrency payment to one of your wallets, right? And there would be a low transaction fee. And it may take 10 minutes to get there or half a day, but it's still fine. I was able to transfer that money. And in that moment, the market didn't move that much. So I don't have to, if I meant to send you $1,000, you probably received somewhere around $1,000, right? And that, so Western Union's probably a little worried right now.
Yeah, I am very interested. Like I said, I view blockchain as having immense disruptive potential. And I'm very interested to see, assuming that the adoption of cryptocurrency continues at the pace that it has been going, will the centralized institutions and governments, will there be a crackdown? Will there be, a pullback if there's if there's too much success, essentially, with blockchain?
Yeah, there's probably a lot of danger with that. I mean, if there's very wide adoption, you have these centralized entities that want to maintain their finger, on a lot of this, right? And so I would imagine as a contrarian, it's probably very appealing to you having the distributed nature of it, right?
Definitely. Let's tear it down.
I love it. So anyhow, now you've been working as a content creator. So not only are you an expert in the technology itself, you're also a marketer and you've been creating content around these things.
I am trying to bring crypto to the masses. So crypto is very interesting. Blockchain is very interesting because even finance professionals, even people who work at institutions, many people are not very familiar with crypto. We're all new to crypto on some level. And so it's very interesting to be in a position of educating on crypto. And I'm learning too, absolutely. I'm learning every single day, but it's a lot of fun to be able to bring crypto to the masses. And that includes even a group of a population that normally is more educated in the topics that they're working on. But that's not really necessarily the case with the institutions, at least at this stage. So it's very interesting.
And so as a content marketer around crypto, how do you identify the topics that you want to write about?
You really have to understand your audience. So I always aim for speaking to the least sophisticated person in the audience that I'm targeting. And like I said, I often go for much more of an educational approach, no matter who the audience is with crypto, because everyone is new. But it's very important to understand who your audience is, where they are in their journey, what their concerns are, to really get a sense of what's the most important to them right now. And the other thing I really try to do is I try to make it fun. If you're reading something, you're consuming some content, if you're bored, you're going to leave the page. And then, I don't really have an opportunity to help anymore. And so my secret to making sure that content comes out great is I really try to have fun writing it. Figure if I'm having fun writing it, then someone else is going to have fun reading it.
And you also write content for search engine optimization, right? So obviously there's that component of your content also has to be fun for Googlebot.
Right. But the great thing about that is that Google uses natural language processing, and Google really does strive to prioritize content that sounds like it's written by experts. And so the more that you sound like an expert, which is obviously great if you are an expert, then the better that you're going to rank. So the very interesting thing to me about the rise of SEO, because that's not a term that anybody was talking about 10 years ago, is that I found out that I've always written for SEO. And so my style of writing, which I've been producing content since back when I was in high school, my style of writing actually has always been SEO optimized. I've always prioritized putting in keywords, making stuff easy to scan, just a lot of different aspects that really do make for good SEO writing. I've always been doing. So it's been very, very validating to see that I've had to make minimal tweaks to my writing style to keep Google happy, actually.
Well, that's very convenient. How much of your daily life and in your transactions are you doing with blockchain or crypto currently?
I spend all day either writing about crypto, editing, doing content strategy to plan what's next. I have crypto dreams sometimes. So I'm all in.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking in terms of like the actual resources that you transact with. So not just your time, but also like the currency you use on a daily basis. Are you using crypto in any transactions currently?
You're actually the first person to ask me that. And like I said before, we're not seeing that yet, where people are commonly using crypto as money for purchases. If I was maybe really big into buying NFTs or, certain assets, then maybe you would see that would be more common. But there's also tax implications of buying and selling crypto. So I think that some of that really needs to get cleared up before people would really seriously consider using it for purchases.
Yeah, and from what I understand, there's certain types of cryptocurrencies that actually have a much greater speed and lower energy consumption for those transactions as well. Like Bitcoin is probably the worst cryptocurrency to try to use for like daily transactions, where there might be others that are much quicker.
Definitely. Bitcoin uses proof of work as a consensus mechanism, which is basically an operating protocol. And it's designed to be the digital the digital version of gold mining. So gold mining is very energy intensive. You're mining for a resource that's limited, which is similar to how Bitcoin has a supply cap. Everything about it is designed to be resource intensive in terms of energy costs and hardware costs, because to create those barriers to entry, just the way physical gold mining has barriers to entry, it's meant to have barriers to entry. And so it's very energy intensive. What's interesting to me is that Ethereum currently uses proof of work, but it's moving to the proof of stake model, which uses validators instead of miners. And the validators, by agreeing to not trade or sell their cryptocurrency, which is called staking, they can earn the right, they can to validate transactions on the network. And so by staking they're essentially collateralizing the network and then earn the right to validate transactions and to earn rewards. Validators do not use a lot of electricity. They don't need special computing hardware. So not only is it more energy efficient, but it's more accessible. So more people around the world could potentially be validators on the proof of stake network or a proof of stake system than could ever hope to have enough energy and computing resources on as a proof of work miner to be able to compete with these big mining pools that are forming for the specific purpose to outcompete other miners.
And from what I understand, there's also some interesting new technology that can help keep some of the energy consumption lower when it comes to Bitcoin mining. I was speaking to a gentleman the other day, and he works with a company that's created a dielectric fluid. And this fluid doesn't conduct any electricity, and it looks like water. And he literally submerges mining rigs and computers into this tank of water, and you can stick your hand in the liquid while it's plugged in and it doesn't shock you. It's amazing. And it apparently it reduces the energy consumption by about 30%. It's really wild.
I feel like you were overhearing or listening in on my conversation I was having with a friend last night, because we were talking about exactly this.
Yeah, the company that I'm talking about just moved to St. Petersburg, and I was meeting with his president last week, or with the company's presidents last week, and it's quite wild. There was actually a mining company, a crypto mining company in Texas recently that just went public, and their whole value proposition was being able to mine for 30% more efficiently, 100% based off of the ability to keep the mining rigs cool. So it is pretty wild, because the first computers were actually liquid cooled because they generated so much heat. And now here we are 60 years later, and doing the same thing again. It's pretty incredible.
That sounds great. I love it.
So then, where do you see, one of the things you just mentioned was NFTs. It seems like NFTs have gone completely mainstream. What are they, and why do you think they've gotten so popular?
Sure. So an NFT is a non-fungible token, and everyone's associating NFTs right now with JPEGs or other collectibles, maybe sneakers. And so and when you hear you hear about NFTs being sold. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of misinformation in the sense, because NFTs are actually just tokens that are not identical to each other, and they're digital tokens that can signify ownership of anything. So currently it's been popular or maybe convenient to have an NFT signify an ownership of, say, a piece of digital art, because it's somewhat easy to do. Everything's digital. But actually, since non-fungible tokens use blockchain technology to achieve consensus in a distributed way that's secure, they can signify ownership of anything. And so my prediction is that going forward, that we will see NFTs. You won't see in the news a sale of an NFT, because that doesn't exactly make sense. The NFT is just the token that signifies ownership. But I do expect that we would see more instances of other asset types being secured and ownership of them being signified by NFTs.
So in a layman's speak, an NFT is a lot like a gift certificate.
NFT is a lot like, let's say, the title to a car.
Okay, so the title to a car. And what are some other examples where having that unique, because like when I think about like stock certificates, it's very difficult to replicate or to knock off any type of thing that might exist on paper or have holograms or any of those types of things. Mm-hmm. Almost becomes like a great use case for what an NFT could be.
Yeah, I mean, I would take that again, actually up to the level of blockchain technology, where there's so many different use cases for blockchain technology. And maybe in some of those use cases, NFTs are the tokens that are used to signify ownership or to signify that a transaction has occurred. So they're really just almost another form of I'm gonna back up. Yeah, they're really just used to signify ownership. Just the way.
Utility? What about the utility that comes with an NFT?
That goes up to blockchain technology, because you can look at the security of blockchain. You can look at how it can achieve distributed consensus with no centralized party more efficiently, more securely, more transparently. And so all the reasons that people like crypto, it's the same reasons that they like NFTs. It's just for different assets that are not interchangeable, the way that one Bitcoin is the same as every other Bitcoin.
Gotcha. I was thinking more along the lines of when you're actually minting an NFT, you get to select if there's any real world utility that goes along with that NFT. Like, for example, membership in a club.
Sure, there's absolutely all kinds of, things that's the great thing about computer code, is it can be customized in so many different ways. And you can use smart contracts to have so many different if-then statements, and you can have contracts that automatically execute. There's a lot of different ways to apply blockchain technology to real world use cases, for sure.
In a smart contract, that's another one of those terms. I mean, it seems like as we talk through blockchain or crypto, there's all these terms that, I mean, to somebody who doesn't know what they are, it might be quite intimidating, but actually a smart contract is something quite simple. Like my favorite example is a vending machine.
Hey, I like to compare it to a smartphone. So you're used to your old phone that you had maybe 15 years ago that was not a smartphone, but it still accomplished the functions that you wanted it to accomplish. And now you have a smartphone, which is, basically a miniature computer in your pocket. And so a smart contract you can compare it to a paper contract in a similar way, where they may accomplish the same functions, but a smart contract can do it quicker, more transparently, more securely, more automated, if that's what is coded in. There's maybe a couple downsides, like smart contracts generally cannot be reversed, but there's generally a lot of upside by using smart contracts. You can generally gain several advantages, assuming that you can get over the lack of knowledge and actually feel comfortable using them, right? Because everybody's new, and it's not like, yeah.
It's a contract that automatically executes, right? Like
It can be. It doesn't have to be, for sure, but it can be programmed to automatically execute, for sure.
So what are some other examples of smart contracts that we might relate to in the real world?
Insurance is another example. You can have, if a storm hits of certain metrics and, I'm going to use a different example. Hang on.
Well, like earthquake insurance, there's a type of earthquake insurance called parametric earthquake insurance. And if you have that insurance and you're within the zone of the, and you automatically file a claim and you automatically receive the benefit.
Right, exactly. So there's ways that smart contracts can be automated, but they don't have to be, because if the participants don't agree that something should occur automatically, it can be more manual. But yes, they always can be made more efficient by having that option to be automatic.
One of the areas that I've been paying attention to as it relates to crypto and blockchain are these DAOs. And you might be thinking I'm thinking of the Dow Jones. It's not that at all. It's DAO. What does that stand for, and how are people coming together to inside of these organizations that are?
So a DAO stands for a decentralized autonomous organization. And it's actually, again, a DAO is essentially another way to apply blockchain technology. So instead of having, picture the company that you work for, especially if it's a large company, instead of having that core management team that makes all the decisions and distributes the information related to those decisions out to the broader team, a DAO functions where all the decision making is made through the blockchain, and so it's done by consensus, and it's really just a completely different way of running an organization and making it so that it's much more like a public good. A DAO is a lot like a public good, essentially, because of the way it's run.
And it seems like they're really catching on. It seems like the crypto version or the blockchain version of democracy.
Right. Blockchain technology as a whole has immense potential to flatten the hierarchy, to bring finance to the masses, to bring applications and services that were maybe previously unavailable. There's immense opportunity for blockchain to accomplish that, because decisions can be made securely and in a decentralized way.
Well, that actually makes me really hopeful for the world, because if you ever watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the one lifeline that always got it right was ask the audience. So I'm really encouraged by how DAOs can help steer themselves through consensus of their members.
Absolutely. I think the advent of, with the way that everyone has a mobile phone in their pocket, it goes hand in hand with the potential for blockchain technology to reach more people. Maybe there's a reason why blockchain is an older technology, but more recently has been able to flourish, and that really does go in hand with all the other technology that we have at our disposal.
So let's talk a little bit about the future of blockchain and where you see yourself fitting into it. Where do you see blockchain and cryptocurrency headed?
Well, I'll tell you what I would love to see. I would love to see a better understanding of kind of the blockchain being the umbrella that has many different applications, with cryptocurrency being actually just one application of decentralized finance. It's really just the payments application of decentralized finance. And so you have DAOs, you have decentralized indexes. There's just so many different ways to have decentralized offerings. And so there's NFTs. I would love to see a greater understanding of blockchain technology more comprehensively, and with the understanding that crypto is essentially just one application of that, and that really the opportunity set is much, much broader.
Is there an area where we haven't yet used blockchain that you feel like there's a tremendous amount of potential that we might see in the near future?
Well, if it sounds like I'm not giving you enough examples of what blockchain can do, it's almost like because it's hard to remember all of them. I was recently editing a piece for Investopedia on all the ways that blockchain technology will disrupt industries in the future. And I had a list of 49 industries that I was working on and explaining all the ways that each of those industries can be disruptive. So it certainly would have been a shorter article and an easier task to try to find which industries blockchain is not likely to impact. I actually myself learned quite a bit from working on that article, and I was even my own already bullish view on the technology became even more bullish when I really understood like how broad really the opportunity set is.
And I think I agree with you. I was looking at some numbers the other day, and there's something called the hash rate. And it seems like we just hit an all-time high for the overall hash rate for Bitcoin.
I think it's just going to keep going up and down and up and down.
Doesn't that mean, so with the hash rate increasing, that means that there's more utilization of that particular blockchain, correct?
Yes, it could be. Yeah, the hash rate denotes the computing power that is associated. So yes, the bigger the hash rate, it means that more energy is being used, more computing power is being used by the network.
And it did take a dive a few years ago. I think it was back in 2017, and that was because China outlawed cryptocurrency.
So China has been slowly cracking down to the point where it's basically completely illegal. There was different aspects of crypto that got outlawed, incrementally, and now it's essentially completely illegal. Crypto transactions are illegal. Cryptocurrency mining is illegal. Initial coin offerings are illegal. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting to see that not all countries, and like I said, there is a real risk that the major powers of the world will be very threatened by cryptocurrency and by blockchain technology. And I think we're already seeing that in China.
And I mean, doesn't China run the risk of being left behind?
Yes. I guess maybe it's a calculation between innovation, what's more important, innovation or maybe holding on to centralized power.
Well, that'll be a really interesting one to watch.
It will.
China famously has a lot of centralized power.
Yes.
Well, very good. Well, Allie, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure learning what you've been thinking about cryptocurrency. Where can people go to follow you and what you're up to and your thought leadership on the topic?
I would love for anyone who wants to check out my website, alliegracegarnett.com. And you can find my email address if you want to get in contact with me. And I'm always happy to chat about crypto.
That sounds great. And you can find the Law of Relevancy anywhere where podcasts are found. Once again, I'm Cord Zoen. Thank you again for joining us. See you next time.